For the first time, federal prosecutors are directly implicating President Trump in campaign finance law violations. This came to light in these court documents connected to the sentencing of his longtime personal attorney, Michael Cohen. The president has an interesting take on the damning documents. On Twitter, he writes, quote, "Totally clears the president. Thank you!" Exclamation point. Joining us now is Neil Katyal. He's the former acting Solicitor General for the United States. He's a law professor at Georgetown University. Professor Katyal, thank you for being here. So, case closed. President Trump says totally clears the president. Is that how you see these documents?
No, not exactly. I don't know if someone told President Trump last Friday was like opposite day or something like that, but there's no, that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. That is a incredibly damning document that his own Justice Department filed essentially against him on Friday, saying that President Trump ordered the commission of various felonies. And serious felonies. Okay,
so listen. For 2 years, we've been having a debate here on New Day, as elsewhere on the airwaves, about whether or not a sitting president can be indicted. And as you know, there are different interpretations of the rule. What is your answer?
So, I think it's exactly the right question, and we've been debating it in kind of theoretical, like law professor ways for a couple of years, and now we're actually getting to the point where that's the question that has to be asked. That's the question that is being asked by the Southern District of New York prosecutors right now, evidently. So my view on this is that the Justice Department has had a strong policy that you can't indict a sitting president, but it has two ambiguities in it which are important. Number one, what if the reason why the president won the election was the exact felonies that he's under consideration for having committed? So, it's one thing if you commit some crime unrelated to the presidency, and you might not want to give prosecutors the power to indict. But here, the crimes go to the very essence of how he became president in the first place. So that's one problem with the, you can't indict President Trump defense. The other is there's a difference between indictment and trial. Indictment is just the formal act of bringing charges against someone. And even if the Constitution prevents the trial because it's distracting, because the president, has so many important duties he has to attend to, which is, not always true with this presidency, but normal presidents who aren't golfing all the time, for those types of reasons, they may not apply to a circumstance in which just the formal act of naming the president a criminal is being considered.
Okay, so just to be clear, you believe that a sitting president can be indicted but not tried while in office?
Well, I think that the weight of constitutional authority suggests that that's exactly right. Walter Dellinger has written about this extensively, and I think we'll be, hearing about that. There's one other really important point here, which is that the prosecutors, according to the New York Times, have concluded that they can charge President Trump even in 2021 after he were to leave office, if he were to serve out his 4-year term. So Donald Trump knows right now.
But wait a second, hold on. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but isn't the statute, but the statute of limitations, if he were to win a second term, then the statute of limitations has passed.
Yeah, so he'd have to win a second term. Now, look, I don't think that he can actually say the statute of limitations can expire anyway, and you can't indict me during the time I'm president, because that would put him totally above the law. So you can't combine these two arguments. Either the statute of limitations works like it does for any other person and would be told, or you can be indicted while you're in office. But you can't kind of combine these to say, haha, I'm now above the law entirely, and I could, shoot someone or something like that and serve out my 2 terms and therefore let the statute of limitations expire. That seems like a bad argument. Well, but I think the more important point here is Trump knows that he's facing some pretty strong criminal liability when he leaves office, one way or another. And even if your sitting president can't be indicted, he's got to know his future looks like it's behind bars unless he cuts some sort of deal with the prosecutors.
All right. Well, that's a really striking statement. It's completely antithetical to what his lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, believes. Rudy Giuliani believes that he has not committed any campaign finance law, and as evidence, he presents the John Edwards case. Here's what he says. The president is not implicated in campaign finance violations because based on the John Edwards case and others, the payments are not campaign contributions. No responsible prosecutor would premise a criminal case on a questionable interpretation of the law. John Edwards was found not guilty of those, trying to make payments, hush money payments, or payments to a woman with whom he'd fathered a child.
Yeah, I think in my sleep, I could, deal with that were I a lawyer for the prosecutor, and Mueller certainly got lawyers far better than me on his team.
But why? Where does it fall apart?
There are lots of problems with that defense. Yeah, so one is the difference with Edwards. Edwards' whole defense was, look, I didn't know anything about the payments. I had nothing to do with the payments alike. Here you've got Michael Cohen and other evidence the prosecutors haven't brought forth yet saying Trump directed the commission of these payments. So that's number one. Number two, the timing of the payments is totally different. Here, Trump had these two affairs in 2006, paid off these women in 2016, moments before the election, making these really, this isn't just some ordinary campaign contribution or something like that. These are potentially the most significant campaign contributions ever in the history of the United States. These payoffs very well may have swung the entire election. That's very different than payments made over a period of years, as it was in Edwards, to an individual. And that allowed Edwards to say, well, I was doing it to protect my wife and things like that. Here, the timing really smells and makes it look like much more it's about the campaign than it does about the president's personal life. And that's particularly so because one of the women, Stormy Daniels, had come forth back in 2011 and said some of this stuff, and Trump didn't pay anything then to protect his family or his wife or anything like that. That the payments occurred right before the campaign.
Neil Katyal,
before the election, excuse me.
We always appreciate getting your perspective and expertise on this. Thank you very much.
So the new Heisman Trophy winner. So just hours after winning college football's most prestigious award, Oklahoma quarterback Kyler Murray apologized for homophobic tweets he posted years ago. This comes just days after comedian Kevin Hart stepped down from hosting the Oscars after a series of anti-gay tweets and, frankly, entire comedy routines resurfaced. Joining me now is CNN contributor and Washington Post national political reporter Wesley Lowery. Wes, is there a difference between what we see with Kyler Murray, who apologized very clearly yesterday after he won the Heisman? Is there a difference between what Kyler Murray is apologizing for and what Kevin Hart is now apologizing for?
Certainly, and I tend to think so. Now there are two initial things up front. The first is that I think it's a very good thing that the way we talk in public as it relates to LGBT people has changed over the years, that language we might have used even just 4 or 5 years ago, we now kind of all accept we shouldn't use. I think that's a good thing societally, right? Beyond that, though, in the Kyler Murray case, this is a case of a young person, a teenager, sending tweets and jokes back and forth with their friends, and then that teenager becoming a public figure. It's a reminder, to any kids who are watching before school this morning that, look, if you become a public figure, delete all your old tweets, delete all your old Facebook posts, because the jokes between your high school buddies aren't going to look so good when all of a sudden you have a massive platform. What's different with Kevin Hart is that Kevin Hart's tweets, the things that he is now getting in trouble for, aren't just tweets. It's also full comedy routines, segments of his stand-up comedy. These were jokes where he was already a celebrity, a well-known comedian who was choosing to employ this type of language as part of his bit. And so he was an adult making a conscious decision about what his comedy was, about his artwork, and that opens it up to fair scrutiny of whether or not it was insensitive or unfair.
It's an important point. I think there's a clear difference here between a 14 and 15-year-old kid, although the advice I would give, besides deleting your tweets, is, homophobic jokes aren't funny ever.
Yes.
So don't make them. And then Kevin Hart, who had as part of his routine. The thing that's interesting is both ultimately apologized. And I think many people that we spoke to in the gay community were willing to welcome Kevin Hart to the Oscars if he acknowledged and apologized and decided to work with them and use this as a moment to discuss these issues. I want to play what Michael Chase said on Saturday Night Live, because I think this is another interesting way to look at this discussion.
Kevin Hart had to step down as host of the upcoming Academy Awards because of homophobic tweets from 2011. But didn't the Academy nominate Mel Gibson for an award just last year? Also, thank you. I love when there's a black lady in the audience. Also, if Kevin Hart isn't clean enough to host the Oscars, then no black comic is. The only black comic I know that's cleaner than Kevin Hart is booked for the next 3 to 10 years.
All right, Michael J. was making an interesting joke there and framing it around race. But if you take race out of it, the issue is no one's perfect. No comedian's going to be perfect. How do you find someone completely pure? And is there a way to apologize enough so that you can be welcomed back into the overall artistic community?
Certainly. I mean, I think that part of the issue here was Kevin Hart's initial refusal to apologize. When this first came out, he said, "I'm not apologizing. Basically, everyone should get over it." And then quickly thought better of that and perhaps got some better counsel and then decided he was going to, right? The reality is that anyone who's lived a public life at some point is probably going to find themselves encountered with something they said a few years earlier or decades earlier that perhaps in the current light doesn't look that good. And like I said earlier, that especially around issues like around issues of how we refer to gay and lesbian brothers and sisters, I think that we've all societally changed and grown a lot in just the last decade, in the last few years, in terms of our public understanding and societal acceptance. And so I think there has to be room for people, especially comedians whose job in many ways is to be provocative and at times to not be politically correct. There has to be some room for that and for that artistic expression. But again, when confronted with something that's clearly offensive or that in today's light doesn't look or sound good, there's got to be a level of humility and a willingness to say, hey guys, sorry about that. Maybe I wouldn't have told that joke today.
Yeah, I mean, Kevin Hart, just to be clear, made jokes about not wanting his children to be gay. And it weren't just jokes. Again, it was an entire routine framed around that, which now he is apologizing for. And a lot of it is, show me what you're going to do about it now. So Kyler Murray, you could be a fantastic two-sport athlete. How are you going to talk about all of us going forward, about gay and straight people going forward? Show us. Show us. And with Kevin Hart, it's show us. Show us what you're going to do going forward.
Definitely. Well, of course. And again, and that's the difference between these two cases, right? So, some back and forth that, language that a high schooler is using, that's a space where someone is still learning. They're still growing. They haven't figured out who they are. The difference with Kevin Hart is that this was a message that he was choosing to reinforce and to broadcast as a public figure, as a celebrity. This is that it's not just a bunch of people being sensitive. The idea that someone prominent would talk or pretend to joke about not wanting their child to be gay reinforces a lot of the worst ideas about how homosexuality works, that this is some type of choice or that people are choosing this or that there's some type of your son is less masculine if he chooses to do that. There's real potential damage there, much less potential damage about a 14-year-old a decade ago teasing his friends.
Wes Lowry, always great to have you on in the morning and talk about this kind of thing because it's complicated and people need to be, I think, free to discuss it out in the open. Appreciate it, Wes.
Of course, always happy to be here.
Allison?
All right, murdered journalist Jamal Khashoggi's chilling last words revealed. We have a CNN exclusive for you next. U.S. senators briefed by the CIA on the murder of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi say they are horrified. Now, a source has given CNN an exclusive briefing on that audio recording of Khashoggi's final moments. CNN's Nick Robertson was provided exclusive details of the transcript of that audio recording.
CNN can now reveal Jamal Khashoggi's last words. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. These previously undisclosed details of what happened that afternoon in October come from a source who's been briefed on the investigation. The source has read a full transcript of an audio recording of Khashoggi's horrific final moments. Within moments of his fateful steps into the consulate, Khashoggi recognizes someone, asks why they are there. The answer, you are coming back. According to CNN's source, the Turkish transcript identifies that person as Mahir Abdulaziz Mutreb, a former Saudi diplomat and intelligence official working for Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, whom Khashoggi knew. Khashoggi is clearly alarmed and replies, "You can't do that. People are waiting outside for me." According to the source, the conversation ends right there. The transcript indicates noises as people set upon Khashoggi. And very quickly, Khashoggi can be heard saying, "I can't breathe." He repeats it again, "I can't breathe. I can't breathe." What happens belies initial Saudi claims. His death was a grave mistake. CNN's source says it's clear from his reading of the transcript Khashoggi's murder was no botched rendition attempt, but the execution of a premeditated plan to murder the journalist. But it is what happens next that is really horrific. The transcript records many voices and noises, then says scream from Jamal, again scream, then gasping. Noises are identified as saw and cutting. Then a voice Turkish authorities identify as Dr. Saleh Mohammed Al-Tubaiki, the head of forensic medicine at Saudi Arabia's Interior Ministry. He says, if you don't like the noise, put your earphones in or listen to music like me. According to the source, Matreb, the apparent leader of the team, makes at least 3 phone calls during the murder to a number Turkish officials identify as being in the Saudi royal court. Only Matreb's side of the conversation can be heard, but there is no sense of panic or of an operation gone wrong. Matreb tells the person in Riyadh, tell yours, that the source takes to mean your boss or your senior, the thing is done. It's done. CNN reached out to Saudi officials to get a response from those named in this report and were told Saudi security officials have reviewed the transcript and tape, and nowhere in them is there any reference or indication of a call being made. A Saudi source close to the Saudi investigation says both Matreb and Tubaiki deny making phone calls. And while the transcript provides no smoking gun directly tying Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to the killing, it seems to echo Senator Lindsey Graham's sentiments after hearing the CIA's assessment of Khashoggi's killing. There's not a smoking gun, there's a smoking saw.
Okay, so CNN shared our source's detailed description with the office of a senator who was briefed by the CIA early this week. And we were told that the CNN report of the transcript was consistent with the briefing that the senator received. And CNN's international diplomatic editor, Nick Robertson, joins us live now. Nick, it's chilling. I mean, everything that you have learned, that the source has revealed to you, is just even more chilling than we could have imagined. So why are the Saudis disputing that phone call
I like the
was
idea.
made?
Yeah, and look, the phone call is the thing that ties this operation.
I have a lot of admiration for General Kelly. It's a hard and difficult job, and obviously he'll be missed.
The lockdown tough general didn't work. I like the idea of someone who is a politician.
When there is no plan whatsoever for how to respond to Mueller's report, you're one of Trump's choices. Is that the kind of situation I want to walk into?
This is New Day with Alison Camerata and John Verma.
Good morning and welcome to your new day. So it isn't clear that the president, any president, has been in a situation like this before. President Trump's own Justice Department says the president directed someone to break the law and gives every indication he would be charged with a federal crime were he not president. The incoming chair of the House Judiciary Committee calls these impeachable offenses. So the stakes this morning, they're flat out different and bigger than the president has yet seen. So this is what we know. Federal prosecutors allege the president instructed Cohen to pay hush money during the campaign to 2 women who claim they had affairs with then-candidate Trump. Michael Cohen also spoke to a Russian offering political synergy in November of 2015, but he did not take a meeting because he already had another connection to the Kremlin. We now know that Michael Cohen is one of at least 14 associates to Donald Trump who interacted with the Russians during the campaign and presidential transition. That's according to analysis done by the Washington Post. Okay, and prosecutors say that Cohen also lied about those negotiations to build a Trump Tower in Moscow and discussed the project with then-candidate Trump well into the 2016 presidential campaign. But wait, there's more. Paul Manafort also lied about his contact with the White House. Prosecutors say they have messages showing that Paul Manafort was talking to people in the administration earlier this year, even after his 2017 indictment. And he lied about his contacts with the Russian operative who has ties to the military intelligence agency that is suspected of hacking the DNC. While all this is going on, there's a shakeup at the highest levels of the White House, maybe not coincidentally. The president announced that Chief of Staff John Kelly is out by the end of the month. And the person who was the front runner to replace him, the one that the president had his eye on, was Vice President Pence's chief of staff, Nick Ayers, who now says he doesn't want the job. So much to discuss this morning. Joining us now, CNN political analyst David Gregory, former federal prosecutor, and CNN legal analyst Laura Coates, and author of the Threat Matrix Inside Robert Mueller's FBI and the War on Global Terror, Garrett Graff. Garrett, I want to start with you. People who were not here last hour did not see you lay this out, but you call this the worst case scenario for America. Approaching that, explain why.
Yeah, what we now know from Friday is not just that Russian intelligence targeted the Trump campaign, which has been becoming clear for some time now. It's that contact was both started earlier, extended longer, and was more extensive than we realized. As you said, at least 14 different Trump associates were involved in contacts with Russians over the course of the 2016 campaign and transition. And the only question we are now in, this is where I believe we're sort of already in the worst case scenario, and the question is, how bad is it? The only question left is how extensive was that contact, how much coordination was there, and just how many Trump people were actually involved.
David, when you look at the little threads that we've all been following for the past 2 years, taken individually, each of them are sort of head scratchers. And then when you take them in totality, which is what happened over the weekend, where you see that we have the graphic of the 14 Trump associates, close Trump associates, top campaign people, top transition people. I mean, we're talking Jared, we're talking Ivanka, we're talking Don Jr., we're talking the campaign chairman. I mean, in totality, that Russians reached out to at least 14 close associates of Donald Trump. It starts to not look coincidental. It starts to look as if maybe people on the Trump team didn't know what Russia was trying to do, but they were being manipulated because Russia was clearly doing something intentional.
Right. And what do we know at the time about all of this? We know that the Obama administration was worried about this, understood what was starting to happen, had their own internal debates about how and whether to speak out about it, but certainly began pushing back on the Russians. Now, that's a separate debate about whether the Obama administration should have done more, and that's a very intense debate. What about the culture within the Trump campaign? We know from the very top, Trump thought a reset with Russia and a warmer relationship was a good idea, not a bad idea. He obviously underplayed business dealings that he'd had in the past and was having in the course of the campaign over the summer. He talked about loving WikiLeaks, encouraged the Russian government to hack Hillary Clinton's emails and find emails that were missing, and that the press would reward him for such. And, by the way, that opposition research on a candidate, no matter where it comes from, is great stuff, and who wouldn't want to go after that? So they were open for business in the Trump campaign for those Russians who came calling. And Garrett made this point last hour. It is shocking and really inappropriate, at least, that nobody in Trump's orbit said, we don't do this. You don't allow a foreign power to start to try to influence the campaign. You don't have inappropriate contacts. It's just not what's done because it's dangerous as well as being totally inappropriate. So that culture is what's under examination here, at least at this point.
And what really is astounding this morning after the last 3 days, you take everything Garrett and David just said there, and on top of that, the Southern District of New York, which is a part of the government of the United States, the Justice Department, put in writing that the person who is now president was involved in a federal crime. Let me just put this up on the screen, P113 here. With respect to both payments, we're talking about the payments made to Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal. Michael Cohen acted with the intent to influence the 2016 presidential election. In particular, and as Cohen himself has now admitted, with respect to both payments, he acted in coordination with and at the direction of individual one. That's legal speak, Laura, for the president knew and directed Michael Cohen to commit a federal crime. They're saying that of the president of the United States. That is crucial.
It certainly is. And where have you seen before somebody who was an unindicted co-conspirator. I mean, the idea that history repeats itself and rhymes seems to be here again from the Nixon years to now. The notion that because of that Office of Legal Counsel opinion, which remember says that they do not want to actually indict a sitting president because of the effect on the executive branch of government and the American people, perhaps, and they want to delay it. What you had there was the Southern District of New York essentially saying, okay, we understand there's a legal opinion going on right now, but you're 2 years out from having perhaps this person not be a sitting president. And if you have your own Justice Department, not just the special counsel Robert Mueller team, which remember, that filing that was given to the court by the SDNY was based on a case that had been farmed out from Mueller to them. So it wasn't a direct connection, although Michael Cohen is the theme there. Mueller had to file a separate report to show people that he is not actually a part of the SDNY. So you have somebody who's not part of this alleged witch hunt that the president keeps talking about, who separately and comprehensively has now called him a felon. And you have the effect on what that's going to mean. And of course, it's not stopping. And one thing that was important in that filing as well to talk about this issue, John, is the idea they said that, look, Cohen's not going to get any good favors from them because he did not talk about things they had not yet charged, things that had not yet been charged or had not been charged at all. So you see the writing is on the wall and it says felon in the Oval Office.
Garrett, sometimes the biggest clue is just right there, you know, in front of our eyes, but you don't see it until the whole puzzle comes together. And so I want to, because you have followed every one of these threads so meticulously that would make the rest of our heads explode. What about Felix Sater? Okay, Felix Sater, as we learned last week, was this Trump associate. He's a real estate developer. He worked with the Trump organization for a decade or so. And here is his letter on October 13th, 2015 to Michael Cohen, okay? And I think that it just spells out the whole mission statement. Let's make this happen and build a Trump Moscow and possibly fix relations between the countries by showing everyone that commerce and business are much better and more practical than politics. That should be Putin's message as well. And we will help him agree on that message, help world peace, and make a lot of money. I would say that's a great lifetime goal for us to go after. This is the mission statement of why whenever people would say, why is Donald Trump so interested in courting Vladimir Putin and Russia? And it was so confusing to people. The marriage of let's make a lot of money and maybe we'll solve world peace in the process.
Yeah, Felix Sater is one of the fascinating characters in this whole saga. Longtime U.S. intelligence asset, actually has some previous ties from previous cases to some of the prosecutors working on Mueller's team now, and by all accounts has been cooperating with this investigation for quite some time now, which when you add him to Michael Cohen, who has spent, as we believe we know, 70 hours talking with Mueller's team, they sort of have this great roadmap of what was taking place. One of the lines involving Felix Sater and this Trump Tower Moscow deal in the Friday court filings really is worth emphasizing, which is that it talks about how the Trump Tower deal would have been worth hundreds of millions of dollars to the Trump organization. Now, that is an order of magnitude or two more than a normal Trump Tower licensing deal historically would have been worth. And so there are a lot of questions coming up over the weekend about why the special counsel chose to phrase it that way, how they know this deal would have been so abnormally lucrative to do business between Trump and Moscow, and sort of what documentary evidence the special counsel possesses, perhaps from Michael Cohen, perhaps from Felix Sater, perhaps from others, about just what the business relationship would have been on the back end.
So it's interesting, David, because you take this in the totality, and specifically with the idea that the SDNY thinks that the president was involved in a crime. You now have the incoming chair of the House Judiciary Committee talking about all of this in just a much different way. I want to play what Jerry Nadler said to Jake yesterday.
Well, they would be impeachable offenses. Whether they are important enough to justify an impeachment is a different question, but certainly they'd be impeachable offenses because even though they were committed before the president became president, they were committed in the service of fraudulently obtaining the office. That would be that would be an impeachable offense.
So he's not saying that he is going to open impeachment hearings, but he is saying he could, David. So take that at face value and then add to that. That's facing this administration right now. This administration doesn't have a chief of staff.
Right.
John Kelly's leaving. The guy the president wanted to hire to handle this won't take the job. And he's dealing with the specter of a House Judiciary Chair who could, if he wanted to, start impeachment proceedings.
Well, and I think what Nadler's saying there is, I don't think we're going to jump up and down and try to impeach the president over campaign finance violations, as bald as the activity may have been. But if you start to put it together with other things that are known about potential business relationships between the Trump organization and Russia, an effort to undermine the election, to interfere in the election on the part of Russia that perhaps the president and those around him knew about and actually coordinated with Russia about, I mean, that becomes a much more devastating picture. And yet, you still sense the caution among Democrats. Why? Because you know there's going to be a huge response from the president and his team on all of this, the question about what the president actually knew that other people may have been up to about these contacts, which is why, for instance, among other things, that the Trump Tower meeting with his son becomes pretty important when they came forward and said that they had the opposition against Hillary Clinton. And the chief of staff piece is so important because we know it's an impossible job under this president. And we also know how consumed President Trump has been and certainly will be once more charges are brought and a report actually comes out. That's going to be an unstable time.
Dave Gregory, Garrett Graff, Laura Coates, thank you all very much. So we are following breaking news. There are multiple reports that British Prime Minister Theresa May is pulling the vote to exit the European Union that was scheduled for tomorrow. The European Union's top court has also ruled that Britain can unilaterally revoke its notice to leave the EU. CNN's Nina DeSantos live outside the Parliament in London with more. Explain what exactly is going on here, Nina.
Good morning to you, John. Well, confusion reigns here in Westminster at the moment because social media is awash with speculation citing cabinet ministers that Theresa May well decide to delay that key vote, one she looks set to lose. Number 10 Downing Street, though, fiercely pushing back on this, telling CNN about half an hour or so ago that the vote still is planned to go ahead tomorrow evening. In the meantime, the Labour whips, remember that the opposition party has also been briefed on these Brexit documents, largely because Theresa May needs as much support as she can from all sides of the House. They have been tweeting that they're expecting an oral statement from the Prime Minister on this subject later on this afternoon, so we'll have to see. In the meantime, if Theresa May does press ahead with this vote, which, as I said, it looks very likely she's going to lose, the question is not so much will she win or lose, but by what margin she loses. If she manages to scrape through by losing by a very narrow margin, perhaps she can just hold on to power long enough to go back to Brussels. There's a key summit that's set to take place there later on this week, and say, let's soften the language on some of the more contentious items on this sheet, in particular that agreement over a so-called backstop between the border of Ireland, which is in the EU, and Northern Ireland, that is still part of the UK. That's the main sticking point for MPs in this House when they vote tomorrow. But in the meantime, the European Court of Justice, as you pointed out, a key adjudicator on EU affairs, has also emboldened those who want to stop Brexit in their tracks, largely because it's decided that the UK can unilaterally pull itself out of the Brexit procedure and keep its current membership terms altogether. That, of course, will focus people's minds. But the immediate question, John, is what happens in the next 24 hours vis-à-vis whether that vote will go ahead? Back to you, Alison.
Oh, my gosh, Nina. I mean, I just don't know if voters knew that they would be confronting all of these thorny issues when they voted for Brexit. Nina, thank you very much. Okay, back here, can the president of the United States be indicted while in office? That's an open question. There is legal debate about it, and we get into it next.